So the big news today, and one that is being treated with typical lack of nuance by people on many different sides of the debate on the war on Iran, is that the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Joe Kent, tendered his resignation over the war, basically saying that he could not serve in this government because it had gone to this war and was going to cost lives and money and doing all of this for the sake of Israel. I mean that's really it's not entirely wrong. It's not wrong. Well, it's just not wrong. It's maybe unnuanced and uncomplicated as compared to reality, but one can't say he's wrong about this. The fact is, and I've made this point repeatedly, the war against Iran that was launched by Israel and the United States serves no American interest from any point of view. It doesn't. I'm not just talking about people like myself who tend to put first a human rights agenda, rule of law, democracy, these sorts of values. It's not about that. There is no cynical or greedy or power hungry calculation that explains American actions here. This is clearly a war that can only possibly benefit one party, and it's not even the Israelis; it's the Israeli government. This war, as I've pointed out in other places, and I'll link to some of the articles that make this case, is going to make life much worse for Israeli people. That is, of course, not the main concern, and I'm not suggesting that it is. I'm saying that only to make the point that this will benefit Benjamin Netanyahu and his government and nobody else. The problem I see is that people are holding up Joe Kent, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, until he submitted his resignation today, as a sort of paragon of protesting the Iran war. And I think that is a very bad mistake, not only because of who Kent is, which I will get into in a minute, but also because even what his resignation represents. And I want to look at what he said. So let me start there. Early in his resignation letter, he said, and I'm quoting, Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. So right away, we're into sort of conspiratorial tones, and I think it's inaccurate. As I've said again in other places, AIPAC and the rest of the Israel lobby, no matter how powerful you want to contend it is, really had no leverage here. They had nothing to use to pressure Donald Trump into this war. This war has not been good for Republicans. It's not been good for Democrats. It's not something that gains anything for anyone, even politically here in the U.S. So, that is on top of the fact that AIPAC basically works its power, as do all lobbying groups, through Congress, which had virtually nothing to do with this war, as many Congress members have lamented, mostly Democrats, it's true. But even Republicans have occasionally had to grudgingly admit, yeah, it wasn't done by the proper process. So this was not a lobby. This was Israel. It wasn't even, again, that much, I think, Israel. I think it was mostly one person in Israel, and that would be Benjamin Netanyahu. And also one person who here in the United States certainly does have Trump's ear because of the huge amount of money that she gives to his and other Republicans' campaigns, which is, of course, Miriam Adelson. It's not to say that, I mean, and let's keep in mind, yes, Trump wants to make Miriam Adelson happy, but Miriam Adelson is not about to go giving her money to Democrats. Okay, so it's not like she has a ton of choice here. So even that money is of limited value. This was really, I think, really came down to, yes, Miriam Adelson has Trump's ear. More than that, Benjamin Netanyahu has Trump's ear. And I think that is really what this came down to. This is not a giant conspiracy. It's not even an example of good lobbying. This is an example of a manipulative demagogue in Israel using his skills to achieve something that he's wanted, as he repeatedly has said, for 4 decades, and finding a president stupid enough to fall for it. So, Kent goes on to say that why he has a personal stake in this is because his wife was killed in a war that was manufactured by Israel. Well, she was killed in Syria in 2019. So that would be when we were fighting ISIL. Did Israel create, is Kent alleging that Israel created ISIL? That's insane. What he probably means is that Israel was responsible for the war in Iraq, and I'm going to hit that one in just a moment. Because he says, high-ranking, I'm quoting again, high-ranking Israeli officials and influential members of the American media deployed a misinformation campaign that wholly undermined your America First platform and sowed pro-war sentiments to encourage a war with Iran. Again, with the conspiratorial nonsense. Look, let's call things what they are. Okay, major segments of the American media are definitely pro-Israel, and quite consciously so. I mean, we can talk about Barry Weiss's CBS as essentially state media, which is what it is now. Um, there's really there can be little doubt of that. Anybody with any objective views on the Middle East can see that. We can also talk about CNN. Now, recently, the man I call Jake the Hack Tapper, who has shown for Israel his entire career, more shamelessly, by the way, than Wolf Blitzer, who used to work for the Jerusalem Post. Tapper had on a so-called Israeli journalist named Emily Schrader. Emily Schrader is a paid propagandist. She bragged about it on Twitter. She talked about her work as a paid propagandist. And he had her on not just to talk abstractly about the war, but to give inside information about what Iranian people in Iran, not expats, people in Iran are thinking. I mean, it was one of the most shameless and disgusting displays I have ever seen. And of course, most people don't know who Emily Schrader is. Most people don't know that she is not in any serious way a journalist, that she is a propagandist in the worst sense of that word. So yes, we know this. This is a long-standing issue, but this idea that there was this massive misinformation campaign throughout the media was not exactly supportive of Trump's deployment of forces to the Middle East in general. Even the mainstream media, certainly more of the partisan media, was not. But even the mainstream media was not. I mean, there are certainly major examples. CBS and CNN are not small outlets. The New York Times has always been very wishy-washy. They'll publish various different points of view, but their editorial tone is without a doubt pro-Israel. I mean, we've seen this a million times. I recommend the work of Asal Rad, who on Twitter follows this stuff on a daily basis about how these headlines and editorial choices are made that slant the reporting. She does excellent work. The point is, yes, of course we can talk, but there was no special conspiracy here. And if anything, there was quite a bit of skepticism about the military buildup of Iran. There was skepticism last year about the attack initially that launched the 12-day war. The fact that we came out of that without any major eruption like the one we have now, put paid to the objections. But I think again, this conspiratorial language is inappropriate and false, and I think that is a problem. Um, he also called this conspiracy to sow pro-war sentiments. He said that this was a lie and is the same tactic the Israelis used to draw us into the disastrous Iraq war that cost our nation the lives of thousands of our best men and women. We cannot make this mistake again. This really needs to be unpacked in a big way. And look, I'll go back to many years ago when John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt first put out their paper before it was a book on the Israel lobby, and I contested it. And I actually met Stephen Walt, and we debated on the radio in the Bay Area. We had a good, respectful debate. Stephen and I have become friends. Not, we're not bosom buddies, but we have kept in touch over the years. I think there's, I certainly have every reason to think there's mutual respect there. There's respect for our disagreements. Um, but I will say bluntly that, the notion that Israel and the Israel lobby were why we got into the Iraq War depends on a very, and I think far too broad definition of the Israel lobby. There was clearly a neoconservative movement that was heavily invested in Israel. But in that case, were these people putting Israeli interests before American ones? I don't think so. Read the clean break paper because it's all laid out there. The entire rationale for the Iraq War, that would, by the way, had it been successful, would have led to an Iran war back then. Um, but the entire rationale for that was, yes, to strengthen Israel regionally, to make Israel the undisputed and unchallenged regional hegemon, but it was for U.S. interests. The way that they saw it and the way, the organization that they spawned, which now long since defunct Project for a New American Century, these the thinking was that this was the best way to enhance America's control of Middle East resources while freeing up America's own resources, both military and to some extent financial, because it was also seen as a way to reduce Israel's military dependency on the United States. And yes, that did imply also giving Israel more freedom of action, which was not, which was certainly a consideration for those folks. Um, the point was to free all that up for the U.S. to turn its attentions elsewhere. This was, the precursor to the whole pivot to Asia idea, which was not in and of itself a bad idea. Obviously, hasn't worked. Um, so, bringing this idea in again that we went to war for Israel in Iraq makes no sense. First of all, Iraq was not really threatening Israel. There's a big difference between Iran today and Iraq then. Iran actively supports the groups that Israel fights. Iran actively supports the Palestinian resistance. There's no question about that. I don't think anyone would deny it. That was true back then as well. It was not Iraq. It was Iran. It was the interests there were never uh, anything like Israel's interest in Iran. And I think that should be clear. Let's also point to the fact that, Netanyahu, as he's, as I said, has been trying to make this happen for 40 years. And until now, no president, no matter how Zionist like Joe Biden or stupid like George W. Bush, um, fell for it. Only Trump was stupid enough to do this. And you see the quagmire that brought in. Now, look, Joe Kent. We need to also consider the source. Listen, I don't doubt that Joe Kent believes this. I don't doubt that Joe Kent resigned because he is upset by what he sees as Trump being duped into betraying not only his campaign promises, but betraying basically the American people and bringing America to war for Israel. And again, there's a certain truth to that. There are no American interests at stake here. There are only Israeli interests, and it's only because Netanyahu has, in my view, Netanyahu was able to talk Trump into this that this happened. We can see also that this was not the typical sort of administration decision that you have, even in, even with somebody like Bush and his decision to go to war in Iraq. He didn't just unilaterally make that decision. There were hearings, there was public discussion, there was manufactured evidence. He actually won over major Democrats. Let's not forget all the Democrats who voted for the authorization of military force and for just in general for everything the Iraq War needed. And only after the American public turned around did people like Joe Biden say, "Ooh, I made a mistake." Um, so, you know, this is not in any way to say that this war against Iran is the same as that. Okay, the war against Iran there's no you can talk about the Iraq War in terms of American interests. I think you'd be wrong. I think American interests were very poorly served, but there was a view that was put forth that justified that war according to American interests. There is no such view now. Nobody has explained even in, forget detail. Nobody's even bothered to explain in broad parameters how this war serves the United States. In fact, it contradicts the United States' own national security strategy, which said that it was going to withdraw from the rest of the world and focus on this hemisphere. This is obviously a departure from that, a complete and fundamental departure from that. So, the we cannot look at these two wars in the same way, and we also can't deny that Joe Kent probably looks at this as something he needs to do morally because this war is so much against American interest, and in that he's certainly right. But let's remember who this man is. This man is a known white nationalist. This is a man who has been connected with the Proud Boys and with other avowedly white nationalist groups his whole life. This is not new. This is a man who advanced the election was stolen notion back in 2020. This is a man who has been known in Washington here in recent months, and you can look this up. I'll see if I can put a link in the description about this as well. The He has been known to have been, how shall one say, rewriting intelligence assessments to suit President Trump. We know that Trump has people doing this all the time. Trump does not want to hear what he doesn't want to hear, and people are afraid to tell him those things because he'll fire them. So, this is a man who called COVID-19 vaccines experimental gene therapy, said that January 6th rioters were being held as political prisoners. I mean, this is not a trustworthy source, and not a source that we should be holding up as an exemplar. And this is part of what is happening now in general that is so problematic, and that we have done on the progressive and human rights and justice side a very poor job of looking at the true right-wing motivations for people who are turning against Israel. Yes, we want people turning against Israel because of what Israel does, because of Israel's behavior, because of its apartheid policies, because it's a settler colonial state that dispossessed people and has kept them without their rights on every level since its inception. And we should not be supporting that. Okay, but when people are using Israel as a vehicle to advance their own white nationalism, not just anti-Semitism, but white nationalism in general, we need to watch out for that because it will undermine the cause of justice for Palestinians. I guarantee it, because the justice for Palestinians depends entirely on having the moral high ground. If we don't have that, if Palestinians cannot continue to claim that, there is no hope, because that's all they have. They have no political power on their side. They have no resources on their side. All they have is the moral high ground. This this incident of Kent's resignation, where he talks about this not being, this being Israel's war. Look, even the bullshit reasons that they've come up with. I mean, no one even talks about this nuclear issue, which was, as I've exposed in numerous places by now, a complete lie. Iran has not been pursuing a nuclear weapon. If they ever truly were, they have not been certainly pursuing one for almost a quarter century, and we know this for a fact. Um, this is not speculation. It's not analysis. We know this for a fact. Okay, so they talked about Iran's missiles and Iran's proxies in the region. Well, those are Israeli concerns. Those are not threats to United States security. Those are threats to Israel, possibly to Saudi Arabia, although, Saudi Arabia had a lot less to worry about before this war started, because they were building bridges with Iran, and that relationship was warming up. It was still pretty cold, and it was, they don't like each other maybe, but there was real progress being made there. Then they come across as some news outlets have tried to float the idea that the Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, but also others, were quietly whispering in Trump's ear to push this war forward. It's nonsense. Look at what's gone on. In what way does this benefit any other Gulf country? Why would they want to do this? They've spent years trying to tone things down with Iran. They've spent years vying for stability. It's been the basis of all of their foreign policy and strategic thinking. Why would they suddenly want the United States to blow the lid off of that and unleash this hell on the region that is sending the global economy into a spiral, which they don't want? I mean, we're talking about what was it? Goldman Sachs, I heard today, said that if this goes on much longer, the GDP of the Gulf states could drop by a combined 14%. You're talking that's a massive recession in a key economic sector. This is just madness to suggest this. And of course, and it should be noted, who was the most prominent person suggesting this? One of the most ignorant people when it comes to foreign policy on mainstream media, Rachel Maddow, who should really just retire. I mean, she has been quite useless for a long time, and unfortunately has a platform where people pay way too much attention to her, especially when it comes to foreign policy, a subject she just is ignorant of. The bottom line is this really did come from Benjamin Netanyahu talking to Donald Trump. Look, Netanyahu and Trump have been, it hasn't been a secret. They haven't been hiding it. They've been in touch almost constantly since Trump came back. Netanyahu's visited Washington, I believe, what is it, 4 times now? Trump's barely been back a year. I mean, that's not a coincidence that any of this happened. This nonsense that Israel was going to attack so that we attacked first. I mean, come on, who are you kidding? This was a decision made months ago, or at least weeks before it happened. The buildup in the Persian Gulf of American forces served no other purpose. I mean, that was obvious. Some people have suggested that Israel or the Mossad or Netanyahu himself were blackmailing Trump. No one's presented any evidence of this, and frankly, you better have some, because given the things that we know about Trump, his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein, his conviction by a judge saying that he committed sexual assault, the fact that he was having an affair with a porn star while his wife was giving birth. I mean, we could go down the list. I barely scratched the surface of the things that for any other politician, literally any other politician in my lifetime, would have been career enders and possibly led to criminal charges. This guy just gets away with it. I mean, if there is something that whether and these conspiracies about Putin having pornographic pics about him, all of these things, it just beggars the imagination. I mean, it's unreasonable unless you've got some real evidence to say that there's something that is worse than all this stuff we already know about Trump that hasn't affected him in the slightest, that he would be so scared of that he would take this country to war and torpedo, by the way, his own party. Because, before now, I think there was a reasonable thought to say that with the proper strategy, the proper messaging, Republicans could have uh, done better than expected, at least in the midterms. They probably would have lost the House in any case, but the Senate is certainly at risk now, and a distinct House majority could end up going to Democrats. Who knows? There's still a long way to go, but this has been a serious political liability for Trump and the whole Republican Party. So if he was blackmailed, you better have some real evidence to show that, and I don't see any. I don't even see a hint of it. Let us remember this pressure on Trump has been there for many years. Okay, he is not the first president to face it. Netanyahu's not lying. He has been on this kick since the 80s. Those of us, I saw Netanyahu speak in New York before he had even risen to much prominence, back in the 80s, and he was talking about Iran back then. He was talking about the need to confront Iran back then. This was before this was even, he might have been the ambassador to the UN by then. I think it was even before that. Okay, so this is a long time ago. And um and he has been after every single president, even Joe Biden, who, in the wake of October 7th, was only too eager to allow Netanyahu to slaughter Palestinian civilians willy-nilly. Even Biden wouldn't go along with this. Okay, so George W. Bush would not go along with it. No, everyone said no until you got an idiot like Trump who would say yes. And we could talk about that, the success, as wrong as it was in Venezuela, made Trump think he could do anything. I believe it was also the idea that he would be the guy who goes down in history as having vanquished the Islamic Republic. That was a big thing. The notion that Netanyahu was feeding him false intelligence or just outright whispering lies in his ear, that's not beyond the realm of possibility. But that's what it was. There's no big conspiracy here. The lobby was powerless in this. There was nothing AIPAC could do. If AIPAC could have done something, if AIPAC was a factor here, you would have seen Congress come out in support of this war. Certainly, on the Republican side, you saw nothing. You saw nothing. You still see nothing. The extent of AIPAC's involvement here is that they are calling Hakeem Jeffries' office. They don't have to bother Chuck Schumer. They already know he's on board. They're calling Hakeem Jeffries' number and saying, we're how much money that you get from our donors, and we're going to take a really hard look at that if you don't at least clandestinely support not necessarily support, but fail to oppose in any material sense this war. And yeah, of course they're fine with the vague statements that Jeffries has made. Mostly they're fine with the fact that he delayed a vote on the War Powers Act until after the attack came. That is not coincidental. But in general, they are not a factor in making this happen. This was Benjamin Netanyahu that did this. He convinced Trump. And this was all about Trump. Okay, this is not some grand Jewish conspiracy. I'm sorry, it's just not. And suggesting that it is if you're only sticking to the idea of Israel and its lobby, then you're just wrong. If you think it's some sort of Jewish conspiracy, then you're anti-Semitic. Now, Kent did not, and I want to be very clear, Kent did not make any intimations that it was a Jewish thing. He was very strictly talking about Israel, and clearly Israel's a factor. Look, anyone who says Israel's not a factor in this is insane. You're just denying what is right in front of your eyes. Of course Israel's a factor, but it's not an overwhelming factor. There was nothing stopping Trump from saying no, like all of his predecessors had done. And that is what we need to keep in mind. We need to understand this was Trump's decision, and we also need to change our entire discourse on foreign policy when it comes to Israel. Israel should not be a factor in our strategic thinking any more than any other ally. We think about Germany, we think about the UK, we think about Saudi Arabia, we think about how things affect our interests in all of those countries. And that is how Israel should be treated. They are an American ally, whatever I may think of that. And they should be treated as such, not as something special, because nobody sees them that way. And when I'm talking about all of those other allies, aside from Saudi Arabia, it's going to be pretty tough to make a case that there's many that are less popular at this point than Israel. It needs to be done with respect to American politics. Joe Kent did what he did in part out of his own white nationalism, and that needs to be understood and acknowledged. He's not a hero for peace. He is a hero for America first. He is a hero for MAGA. And incidentally, he stands against a war that we agree with him about standing against, and some of his reasons we agree with him as well. But we should be very clear about those that we don't. And I think there was no reason for him to bring up the conspiracy theories around Iraq. Certainly not to invent any around ISIL and the death of his wife in 2019, that had anything to do with Israel. So, I think that we need to look at that. We need to understand that, and we need to not allow that sort of thing to foment And yeah, I'm talking out of some self-interest here, being Jewish and being an American, but I'm also talking out of the interest of being somebody who has spent my life fighting for a change in American policy to promote the rights of all equally, particularly the Palestinian people, and to promote a policy in the Middle East that is beneficial to all. So I'll leave it there. If you found this useful, please like, share, subscribe. If you can support this work, please, I ask you to do so. You're seeing on your screen right now um, how you can donate and how you can support Cutting Through. There are links in the description, and I will be talking to you again soon, I'm sure.